The morning had started like every other morning for the past 8 years, with Catherine Hale being expertly ignored. She stood in the corner of the Ashford Estate's grand drawing room, a cup of lukewarm tea balanced on her palm, watching her mother fuss over her younger sister Margaret's wedding dress for what had to be the thousandth time. The July heat pressed against the windows like something alive, making the room feel smaller, the air thicker, everything unbearable. Not just any match, but Viscount Pemberton's son, a man with money, connections, and a face that didn't curdle milk. "Isn't she exquisite?" Lady Ashford breathed, pressing her hands together as if in prayer. "Exquisite," Catherine echoed flatly. Nobody looked at her. Nobody ever did. Her older brother Thomas sprawled in an armchair nearby, already half drunk, though it wasn't yet 3 o'clock. "Father's going to bankrupt us with this wedding," he muttered, but even he couldn't tear his eyes from Margaret. "Worth it, though. Pemberton connection could save us." Could save you, Catherine thought bitterly. Could save this family that had given up on her years ago, that had relegated her to the role of spinster aunt before she'd even turned 25. Could save everyone except the daughter nobody wanted to talk about. "Catherine." Her mother's voice cut through her thoughts like a knife. "Do stop lurking in the shadows. You're making the room feel crowded." The room was enormous. Catherine was one person, but she moved anyway, drifting toward the window, because that's what invisible women did. They rearranged themselves around other people's comfort. Outside, carriages were already arriving for the evening's pre-wedding ball. The entire county had been invited. "I still don't understand why Catherine must attend tonight," Margaret said suddenly, her voice carrying that particular tone of concern that was really just cruelty in a prettier dress. "She'll only be miserable, standing against the walls while everyone else dances." "Margaret," Lady Ashford said, but the rebuke was gentle, toothless. "Catherine is your sister." "Catherine is a ghost," Thomas said, laughing into his glass. "Hasn't had a dance partner since the Morrison boy took pity on her in '42, and that was 6 years ago." The words should have hurt. They didn't anymore. Catherine had built calluses around her heart, thick enough that these little cruelties just bounced off like rain on slate. But something else was building underneath, something that had been growing for months now. Years, maybe. A pressure. A heat. A sense that if she didn't break free soon, she would simply stop existing altogether. "I'll attend," Catherine said quietly. "I wouldn't want to miss Margaret's triumph." Nobody caught the edge in her voice. They never did. Mark. The ballroom that evening glittered like something out of a fever dream. Hundreds of candles blazed in chandeliers overhead, their light caught and multiplied by enormous mirrors lining the walls. The air smelled of roses, champagne, expensive perfume, and the particular musk of too many bodies pressed into too small a space, all of them sweating gently in their layers of silk and wool despite the open windows. Catherine arrived with her family and immediately understood she'd made a terrible mistake coming. Margaret floated through the crowd like a swan on still water, gathering admirers with every step. Their mother basked in reflected glory, accepting compliments on her daughter's beauty as if she'd personally sculpted every feature. Even Thomas managed to look almost respectable, his earlier drunkenness concealed behind forced sobriety and an expensive jacket. And Catherine was invisible again. She found her usual spot along the eastern wall, half hidden behind a potted palm, and watched the machinery of society grind forward. The musicians struck up a waltz, couples paired off with the precision of a military operation, the beautiful with the powerful, the wealthy with the connected, everyone finding their proper place in the hierarchy. "Poor thing." The voice came from somewhere to her left. Catherine didn't turn. She knew better than to think anyone was talking to her. "Who?" Another voice, male, younger. "Catherine Ashford, the sister." There was a pause, the sound of glasses clinking. 5 seasons and not a single proposal, not even from the desperate ones. "Can't blame them. Have you looked at her?" Catherine's fingers tightened on her fan. Still, she didn't move. This was nothing new. She'd overheard worse. "She's not hideous," the first voice said, almost charitably. "Just unfortunate. Plain features, sharp tongue, no accomplishments worth mentioning, and that posture, like she's trying to disappear into the wallpaper." "Perhaps she should." They laughed. The sound scraped against Catherine's ears like broken glass. She made herself breathe, made herself stay still. This was the game. This was how it worked. You endured, you survived, you waited for it to be over so you could go home and pour all that poison into your diary instead of screaming it at the world. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, that pressure inside her was building faster than usual. Is that the Duke? The words made Catherine's attention sharpen. She shifted slightly, enough to peer around the palm fronds without being obvious about it. Adrian Blackthorne, 6th Duke of Blackthorne, stood near the center of the ballroom like a dark star around which everyone else orbited. He was 29, unmarried, and possessed of the kind of wealth and power that made him essentially untouchable. Catherine had seen him before at various functions, always from a distance, always surrounded by admirers, always looking faintly bored by the whole circus. He was handsome in that brutal, aristocratic way that came from centuries of selective breeding. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair, eyes like chips of gray stone. The kind of face that would age well, that would look distinguished at 60, that would stare out from family portraits long after he was dust. Right now, those stone-gray eyes were scanning the ballroom with obvious disinterest. "They say he has to marry soon," someone nearby whispered. "His mother is pushing for an alliance with the Covington family. The Covington girl's barely 18. What does that matter? She's beautiful and comes with $20,000 a year." Catherine felt something sour rise in her throat. Of course, that's all that mattered. Beauty and money, the only currencies that held value in this glittering, hollow world. She was about to turn away, to retreat further into her corner, when the Duke's gaze swept past her section of the wall and stopped. For one impossible second, Catherine could have sworn he was looking directly at her. Then his eyes moved on, and she realized how pathetic she was, reading meaning into a stranger's casual glance. "Blackthorne looks displeased," the first voice from earlier said, closer now. Catherine recognized the speaker. Lord Hastings, a portly man with more money than sense. Wonder what's bothering him? Probably the same thing that bothers all men of his station. This was a new voice, crisp and cold. The endless parade of simpering girls and their grasping mothers. Catherine risked another glance. A small group had formed near the Duke. Half a dozen men in expensive evening wear, drinks in hand, the casual confidence of the truly powerful radiating from them like heat. "Speaking of simpering girls," Hastings said, "what do you make of tonight's star, the Ashford beauty?" "Margaret?" The Duke's voice. Catherine froze. She'd never heard him speak before. It was deeper than she'd expected, with a quality like expensive whiskey, smooth on the surface, burning underneath. "Lovely to look at, I suppose, if you like that sort of thing." "You don't?" "I prefer women with something between their ears besides air." The group laughed. Catherine felt a small, traitorous flicker of satisfaction before crushing it. The Duke wasn't defending her. He was just bored with her sister. That wasn't the same thing. "Well, you're in the wrong place if you're looking for intelligence," another man said. "Half these girls can barely read their own names." "What about the other sister?" This voice was new, younger, with an edge of cruelty to it. "The plain one. What's her name? Caroline? Charlotte?" "Catherine," someone corrected. "The spinster." Catherine's blood went cold. "Oh, yes." The young voice again, clearly enjoying himself. "I'd forgotten about her. Is she here tonight?" "Probably hiding somewhere." Hastings laughing. "She always is." "Can you blame her?" The Duke's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "If I looked like that, I'd hide too." The world tilted. Catherine heard the words, processed them, felt them land in her chest like physical blows. But she couldn't quite believe them. The Duke of Blackthorne, who had never spoken to her, never even acknowledged her existence, was mocking her appearance to a group of strangers at her sister's wedding ball. "Blackthorne, that's harsh," someone said, but they were laughing. "Is it?" The Duke sounded genuinely curious. "I'm simply stating facts. The girl is plain, awkward, and from what I understand, possessed of neither fortune nor accomplishment. What exactly would be the point of her?" The point of her. As if she were an object, a piece of furniture to be evaluated and found wanting. "She does read quite a bit, I've heard," Hastings offered, though his tone suggested this was damning rather than praising. "How terrifying," the Duke said dryly. "A woman who reads. Next you'll tell me she has opinions." More laughter. Catherine felt something crack inside her chest. Honestly, I feel rather sorry for the parents, the Duke continued, warming to his theme now. His voice carried easily across the ballroom. Not shouting, just that particular upper-class projection that assumed everyone would want to hear. Imagine investing in a daughter's debut only to discover she's completely unmarketable. At least with a son, you can ship him off to the military or the church. But a daughter like that? She's just dead weight. Dead weight. The pressure inside Catherine exploded. She didn't remember deciding to move. One moment she was frozen behind the palm. The next she was striding across the ballroom floor, her vision tunneled down to a single point. The Duke of Blackthorn's aristocratic face. The crowd parted. Later, she would wonder if they'd sensed something. Some change in the air, some warning that the natural order was about to be violently disrupted. But in the moment, she only knew that suddenly there was clear space between her and the man who had just casually destroyed whatever remained of her dignity. He saw her coming. His gray eyes widened slightly. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of recognition. Catherine didn't give him time to speak. Her hand connected with his face in a crack that seemed to echo off the vaulted ceiling, the crystal chandeliers, the shocked faces of 200 witnesses. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. The Duke stared at her, one hand rising slowly to his reddening cheek. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, and the shock in his eyes was so complete it would have been funny under different circumstances. "You," he started. "I am Catherine Ashford," she said, and her voice didn't shake. That amazed her. Everything else was shaking, her hands, her knees, her entire understanding of who she was and what she was capable of, but her voice held steady. "I am plain and awkward and unmarried. I read too much and have opinions. I am, by your assessment, dead weight." The Duke's jaw worked. No words came out. "But I am not," Catherine continued, loud enough now that every person in the ballroom could hear. "Deaf. I am not invisible, no matter how desperately you all wish I was. And I am not, I will never be, someone who allows a spoiled, arrogant aristocrat to discuss my worth like I'm livestock at auction." Someone gasped. Catherine couldn't tell who. "You think I don't know what you all say about me?" She was aware distantly that she was making everything worse, that with every word she was cementing her exile, guaranteeing her ruin. But she couldn't stop. 8 years of silence were pouring out of her like blood from a wound. "You think I haven't heard every pitying whisper, every cruel joke, every assessment of my failings? I've heard all of it. I've smiled through all of it. I've played the invisible woman because that's what you wanted, what you all needed to make your little world run smoothly." She took a step closer to the Duke. He didn't back away, but something flickered across his face. Not fear exactly, but uncertainty. Maybe he'd never been challenged by someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. "But tonight," Catherine said softly, just for him, "tonight I stopped being invisible. And you, Your Grace, are the one who made that happen. So thank you." She turned then, not waiting for a response, and walked toward the ballroom doors. The crowd melted away from her like she was diseased. Maybe she was. Maybe rebellion was catching. Behind her, she heard voices erupting, shock, outrage, the gleeful chatter of scandal taking root. Let them talk. Let them feast on this. It would be the most exciting thing to happen in their empty lives all season. Catherine made it to the entrance hall before her mother caught up with her. "What have you done?" Lady Ashford's face was white, her voice strangled. "What have you done?" "What I should have done years ago," Catherine said. Her mother slapped her. Not hard, Lady Ashford was too refined for true violence, but sharp enough to sting. "You've destroyed us, destroyed yourself. You'll be ruined. We'll all be ruined." "No." Catherine touched her burning cheek, tasted blood where her lip had split against her teeth. "Margaret will be fine. Margaret is beautiful. You said it yourself. She's exquisite. One spinster sister's scandal won't change that." "You stupid, selfish girl." "I'm 26, Catherine interrupted. "Not a girl. Not anymore. And yes, I'm selfish. I finally learned to be." She walked out before her mother could respond, out through the great doors and into the summer night. Behind her, the ball continued. She could hear music starting up again, the machinery of society smoothing over this awkward bump and continuing forward. But Catherine Ashford, the invisible woman, had finally made herself seen. and there was no going back from that. The exile was swift and absolute. By the next morning, the whole county knew. By afternoon, the story had reached London. By evening, Catherine's fate was sealed. She was summoned to her father's study at dawn 3 days after the incident. Lord Ashford looked 10 years older, standing behind his desk like a judge, preparing to pass sentence. "You will go to Thornfield Cottage," he said without preamble. "Effective immediately." Thornfield Cottage, the family's country property isolated in the Yorkshire moors, so far from civilized society it might as well be another country. It was where they sent family members who needed to disappear, the mad aunt, the disgraced cousin, the problems that couldn't be solved. "For how long?" Catherine asked. Her father's laugh was bitter. "Until you die, probably. Or until society forgets you exist, whichever comes first." "Father, you struck a duke." His voice cracked like a whip. "Not just any duke, but Adrian Blackthorne. Do you understand what you've done? The Blackthorne family could destroy us with a word. They could call in debts, block Thomas's commission, ruin Margaret's engagement. Then why haven't they?" The question hung in the air. Lord Ashford's mouth worked, but no answer came. Because that was the strange thing. In the 3 days since the slap, there had been no retaliation from the Blackthorne family. No threats, no demands, no consequences beyond the social death Catherine had expected. Just silence. It made no sense. Men like the Duke didn't let insults pass unanswered. "It doesn't matter," her father said finally. "The damage is done. You're unmarriageable now. Not that you were a prize before, but at least there was hope. Now you're a scandal. And this family cannot afford another scandal." "Because of the debts," Catherine said quietly. Her father's face went rigid. "That is not your concern." But it was. Catherine had known for years that the Ashford fortune was more fiction than fact, that her father's gambling and Thomas's drinking had slowly bled them dry. Margaret's match to Pemberton was meant to save them, bring fresh money into the family coffers, and Catherine had nearly destroyed it by refusing to be invisible for one single night. "I'll go," she said. "Thornfield is fine." "You don't have a choice." "I know." She met her father's eyes. "But I want you to know I'd choose it anyway. I'm tired of being here. Tired of being nothing." Something flickered across her father's face. Pain, maybe, or shame. But it passed quickly, buried under aristocratic coldness. "A carriage will take you tomorrow morning," he said. "Pack only what you need. You won't be attending any social functions." "Lucky me." She left before he could respond. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. Catherine packed mechanically. Books, practical dresses, the few possessions she actually cared about. Her room was already starting to feel like it belonged to someone else, some ghost of a girl who'd believed she could be normal. Margaret came to see her once, hovering in the doorway like she was afraid to come closer. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know you didn't mean to—" "I meant every word," Catherine interrupted. "I meant the slap too." Her sister's perfect face crumpled. "Why? Why would you do that to us? To yourself?" "Because I was tired of disappearing." Catherine folded another dress, her movements precise. "You wouldn't understand. You've never been invisible." "I could talk to Father." "Don't." Catherine looked at her sister, really looked, seeing past the beauty to the girl underneath, someone who'd been given every advantage Catherine lacked, and still managed to be kind sometimes. "Just be happy, Margaret. Marry your Viscount. Have beautiful children. Live the life you're supposed to live." "What about the life you're supposed to live?" "I'm making it up as I go," Catherine said. "Turns out there isn't a handbook for ruined spinsters." Margaret left crying. Catherine felt nothing. That night, she sat at her window and watched the summer stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow she would leave this house, possibly forever. She should feel scared, devastated, something. Instead, she felt light. The morning came gray and cold despite the season. Catherine dressed in traveling clothes, tied her dark hair back severely, and walked downstairs without looking back at her room. Her mother was waiting in the entrance hall, her face carefully blank. "Catherine?" A pause. "I hope you realize what you've thrown away." "I do," Catherine said. "All of it." The carriage was already loaded. Catherine climbed inside without ceremony, without goodbye, without any of the tearful farewells that should have marked this moment. As the horses started forward, she looked back once at the house where she'd spent 26 years learning to be small, quiet, acceptable. Then she faced forward, toward Yorkshire, toward exile, toward whatever came next. Behind her, the Ashford estate grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. The invisible woman had vanished. But Catherine Hale was just beginning. The Yorkshire moors stretched out like a gray-green ocean under an iron sky, and Thornfield Cottage sat at the edge of it all, like a ship run aground and forgotten. Catherine stepped out of the carriage into wind that cut straight through her traveling cloak. The driver was already unloading her trunks, clearly eager to be gone before the weather turned worse. She couldn't blame him. This place looked like the end of the world. "This is it, miss?" he said, not meeting her eyes. Even here, 100 miles from civilization, her scandal had preceded her. The servants knew. Everyone knew. "Thank you," Catherine said, but he was already climbing back onto his seat, snapping the reins. The carriage rattled away down the rutted track, and within minutes it had disappeared into the endless moorland, leaving her utterly alone. The cottage was larger than its name suggested, a squat stone building with 8 rooms built to withstand the brutal northern winters. Ivy crawled up the walls like it was trying to pull the whole structure back into the earth. The windows were dark, blank as dead eyes. Catherine picked up the lightest of her trunks and carried it to the door. The key her father had given her turned in the lock with a grinding sound that suggested it hadn't been used in years. Inside smelled of dust and damp and something else. The particular emptiness of a place where no one had laughed or cried or lived in far too long. "Perfect," Catherine muttered, setting down her trunk in what appeared to be the entrance hall. "Absolutely perfect." The next few hours passed in a fog of practical tasks. She found the kitchen, managed to coax the ancient stove into reluctant life, discovered that the previous occupant, her mother's mad Aunt Judith, dead these 5 years, had left behind a strange collection of possessions, including 73 books, a stuffed owl, and a full set of men's clothing in various sizes. By evening, Catherine had a fire going in the parlor, hot tea in a chipped cup, and the beginning of a plan. She would not rot here. She would not fade into the wallpaper of this isolated cottage the way she'd faded into the wallpaper of society. If she was going to be exiled, she would make something of it. The question was what? She was still pondering this when she heard the knocking. At first she thought she'd imagined it. Who would possibly come here, to this forgotten corner of nothing? But there it was again, deliberate and firm against the front door. Catherine opened it to find a woman standing on her doorstep, perhaps 40 years old, with work-roughened hands and a face that had seen hard weather and harder times. "You're the Ashford girl," the woman said. Not a question. "Catherine Hale," Catherine corrected automatically, then wondered why she'd bothered. "Can I help you?" "I'm Mrs. Bramwell. I live down the valley." She nodded toward the darkening moors. "Came to see if you needed anything. Food, supplies, company." Catherine studied her, looking for pity or contempt or that particular gleam people got when confronted with scandal. She found none of it. "Why?" Catherine asked bluntly. Mrs. Bramwell's mouth twitched. "Because your Aunt Judith was kind to me when my husband died, and because I remember what it's like to be alone." Something in Catherine's chest loosened slightly. "Come in," she said. "The tea's terrible, but it's hot." Mrs. Bramwell came in, wiping her boots carefully on the mat, and Catherine felt the first small crack in her isolation. They sat in the parlor while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. Mrs. Bramwell explained the basics: where to buy supplies in the village 8 miles away, which farmers would trade fairly and which would cheat her, how to manage the cottage through winter, which was coming faster than Catherine might think. "Folk around here don't care much about society scandal," Mrs. Bramwell said eventually, stirring sugar into her tea. "Most of them couldn't name a duke if their lives depended on it. You slapped some London toff, they'll probably think it's funny." Catherine felt something dangerous rise in her throat. Laughter, maybe, or tears. "I doubt anyone in London finds it funny." "London's a long way from here." Mrs. Bramwell's eyes were sharp. "Question is, what are you going to do with yourself? Can't just sit in this cottage and wait to die." "I wasn't planning to." "Good. Because winter kills the weak ones." It wasn't said cruelly, just matter of fact. You've got maybe 3 months to get strong or get out. After Mrs. Bramwell left, Catherine sat in the growing dark and thought about strength, about survival, about what it meant to be exiled from a world she'd never fit into anyway. Maybe this wasn't punishment. Maybe this was freedom. The thought terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of Catherine's life. She learned to chop wood badly, then less badly, learned to coax vegetables from the cottage's overgrown garden, to trade eggs from the chickens she'd bought from a farmer's wife for bread and milk and basic supplies. Learned the rhythms of this new life. Up at dawn, work until exhausted, fall into bed, and do it again. Her hands, once soft and useless, developed calluses. Her back grew stronger. Her mind, freed from the constant performance of society, began to stretch and flex in ways it never had before. She read voraciously, tearing through Aunt Judith's strange collection: philosophy, radical politics, natural sciences, novels society would have deemed inappropriate for unmarried ladies. She wrote long letters to nobody, pouring out thoughts she'd never been allowed to voice. She walked the moors until she knew every path, every stream, every stand of twisted trees. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, she stopped being invisible and started being real. The village, really just a collection of stone houses clustered around a church and a tavern, took longer to warm to her. The locals were suspicious of outsiders, doubly so of gentry, who'd been cast out of their own kind. Catherine was neither one thing nor another, and that made her dangerous in a different way. She won them over by inches, by paying fair prices, by not putting on airs, by helping Mrs. Bramwell's daughter through a difficult childbirth when the midwife was delayed, using knowledge gleaned from medical texts her mother would have fainted to know she'd read. 2 months into her exile, Catherine realized she hadn't thought about London society in weeks. Hadn't wondered what they were saying about her, hadn't imagined scenarios where she was welcomed back. She didn't want to go back. The realization hit her one morning as she stood on the hillside behind the cottage, watching dawn break over the moors. This life, hard, lonely, often brutal, was hers in a way nothing had ever been before. She was just beginning to believe she might survive this when the letter arrived. Mrs. Bramwell brought it up from the village, her face carefully neutral. Came on yesterday's coach. London postmark. Catherine's stomach dropped. She took the envelope with hands that wanted to shake but didn't quite. The seal was unfamiliar, not her family's crest. "Thank you," she managed. Mrs. Bramwell hovered. "You want company while you read it?" "No, but thank you." After the older woman left, Catherine stood in her kitchen for a long time, just staring at the letter. Nothing good could come from London. Nothing good ever had. Finally, she broke the seal. The handwriting was precise, masculine, unfamiliar. "Miss Ashford, I find myself in the unusual position of owing an apology to someone I have never formally met. What I said at your sister's ball was cruel, thoughtless, and beneath the standards I hold myself to. You were correct in your assessment. I am a spoiled, arrogant aristocrat who spoke of your worth as if you were livestock. The fact that I believed my words to be private rather than public does not excuse them. Cruelty is cruelty regardless of audience. I have no expectation of forgiveness. I am writing merely to acknowledge the harm I caused and to express genuine regret for it. I hope your exile is treating you better than society did. Respectfully, Adrian Blackthorne." Catherine read it 3 times, then a 4th. Then she did something she hadn't done since leaving London. She laughed, hard enough that it bent her double, hard enough that tears streamed down her face, hard enough that Mrs. Bramwell's chickens scattered in alarm. The Duke of Blackthorne had apologized to her. In writing, with what appeared to be actual sincerity. It was the most absurd thing she'd ever heard. She should burn the letter, ignore it, pretend it had never arrived. Instead, she found herself sitting at Aunt Judith's old writing desk that evening, pen in hand, staring at blank paper. If she responded, she would be opening a door she'd worked hard to close, engaging with the world that had rejected her, breaking the clean separation she'd built between her old life and this new one. But the letter sat beside her like a challenge, and Catherine had never been good at backing down from challenges. She began to write. "Your Grace, I am surprised to receive your letter, and even more surprised to find it apparently sincere. Apologies from men of your station are rare enough to be noteworthy. I accept your regret. though I'm not certain I forgive it. Forgiveness seems to require a level of care about your opinion that I no longer possess. As for my exile, it is hard, cold, lonely, and more honest than anything I experienced in London society. I find I prefer honest suffering to polite contempt. Perhaps that makes me mad. My aunt certainly was, and this was her cottage, Catherine Hale. She sent it before she could reconsider, handing it to the mail coach driver who passed through the village twice weekly. Then she tried to forget about it and return to the work of survival. 3 weeks later, another letter arrived. This time she opened it immediately, standing right there in the village store while the shopkeeper pretended not to watch. Miss Hale, your brutal honesty is refreshing in a world that traffics primarily in pleasant lies. I wonder if you would indulge my curiosity on a matter. In the brief encounter we had, you mentioned reading and having opinions as if these were defects rather than virtues. Do you truly believe that, or were you simply throwing my words back at me? I ask because I find myself increasingly surrounded by people who believe intelligence in women is at best inconvenient and at worst dangerous. Your perspective would be valuable. A.B. Catherine stared at the letter for a long time. This was no longer a simple apology. This was the beginning of something else, a conversation, maybe even a connection. She should end it, should write back telling him to leave her alone, that she had no interest in becoming his pet project or intellectual curiosity. Instead, she responded, and he wrote back. And she replied, and somehow, impossibly, they began a correspondence. The letters came weekly at first, then twice weekly, then so often that the mail coach driver started making jokes about it. They argued about philosophy, politics, literature. He told her about the suffocating expectations of his position. She told him about the freedom of having nothing left to lose. Neither of them acknowledged the strangeness of it, that the Duke who had mocked her was now the only person in England who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts. Catherine told herself it meant nothing, that it was just words on paper, a game to pass the time. But when October came and the first snows began to dust the moors, she found herself watching for the mail coach with an anticipation that had nothing to do with practical concerns. Mrs. Bramwell noticed, of course. "You're writing to someone," she said one afternoon, helping Catherine preserve the last of the garden vegetables for winter. "I'm writing to lots of people," Catherine lied. "Someone who makes you smile at empty air." Mrs. Bramwell's hands didn't stop working, but her voice was careful. "Just be cautious, girl. Getting attached to someone from your old life, that's a good way to get hurt again." "I'm not attached." "Then why do you check for letters every day?" Catherine had no answer to that. The letter that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday in late October, carried by a private messenger rather than the usual coach. Catherine knew before she opened it that something was different. The paper was heavier, the seal more formal. "Miss Hale, I am coming to Yorkshire. Before you panic, which I imagine you are doing, let me explain. I have business in Leeds and plan to visit several northern estates afterward. Your cottage is not so far out of the way. I would like to meet you properly. Not as scandal and scandalizer, but as two people who have spent 3 months in honest conversation. I will arrive November 2nd. You may refuse to see me, of course, but I hope you won't. A." Catherine's hand shook as she read it, then read it again. He was coming here. In 8 days. The Duke of Blackthorn was coming to her exile, to this cottage at the edge of nothing. "No," she said aloud to the empty kitchen. "Absolutely not." But even as she said it, she was mentally cataloging what needed to be done. Cleaning, repairs, the awkward question of whether she owned anything suitable to wear when entertaining a duke in a moorland cottage. "You're being an idiot," she told herself. She spent the next week in a state of controlled chaos anyway. Mrs. Bramwell helped, though she made her disapproval clear. "This is the man who insulted you," she kept saying, "the man whose words drove you here." "I know. And you're scrubbing floors for him?" "I'm scrubbing floors because they're dirty," Catherine snapped. "It has nothing to do with him." But it did, and they both knew it. November 2nd dawned cold and clear. Catherine had barely slept, had changed her dress 3 times, had rearranged the parlor furniture until even the stuffed owl looked judgmental. She was standing at the window watching the road when she saw the carriage approaching. It was smaller than she'd expected, a private coach rather than the full ducal procession. practical for the rough northern roads. It pulled up in front of the cottage, and Catherine's heart hammered so hard she thought she might be sick. The door opened. A man stepped down. Adrian Blackthorne looked different in daylight, away from ballrooms and champagne. Taller, somehow. Less polished. His dark coat was spattered with mud from the road, his hair wind-blown. The arrogance she remembered had been replaced with something else. Nervousness, maybe. He saw her in the window. Their eyes met. Catherine made herself walk to the door and open it before she could lose her nerve. They stood there, separated by 5 feet and 3 months of letters, and neither of them spoke. Up close, Catherine could see details she'd missed in the ballroom, the fine lines around his eyes, the slight crookedness of his nose where it had been broken once, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "Miss Hale," he said finally, and his voice was different too, rougher, real. "Your Grace, I half expected you to have the door barred. I considered it." A smile flickered across his face. "May I come in?" Catherine stepped aside. "You've come all this way. Seemed rude to make you stand in the cold." He entered, ducking slightly under the doorframe, and Catherine was suddenly hyper-aware of how small the cottage was, how shabby compared to what he must be used to. But he didn't seem to notice. He was too busy looking at her. "You're different," he said. "So are you." "How so?" Catherine considered. "You look less bored, and your face isn't quite as punchable." The laugh that burst out of him was startled and genuine. "Careful, I might think you're warming to me. Don't get ahead of yourself." She led him to the parlor, offered tea, played hostess with skills she'd learned in her old life and half forgotten here. But the conversation that had flowed so easily in letters now stuck in her throat. It was Blackthorne who finally broke the awkwardness. "I need to tell you something," he said, setting down his cup. "The truth about why I'm really here." Catherine's stomach tightened. "All right, but my mother is pressuring me to announce an engagement by the end of the year. To the Covington girl, Victoria. She's 18, beautiful, accomplished in all the expected ways. It would be a perfect match." "Congratulations," Catherine said flatly. "I'm not going to do it." She looked at him sharply. "Why not?" "Because I've spent the last 3 months writing to the only woman in England who argues with me, who challenges me, who treats me like a person rather than a title." He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. "Because somewhere between your first letter calling my apology inadequate and your last letter eviscerating my position on land reform, I realized I don't want to spend my life with someone who agrees with everything I say." Catherine's heart was doing something complicated and dangerous. "You can't possibly be suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything yet," he interrupted. "I'm simply saying that I came here because I needed to know if what we have in letters translates to reality. If the woman who slapped me in a ballroom is as remarkable face-to-face as she is on paper." "And?" Catherine's voice came out steadier than she felt. "And she's more." He stood, crossed to where she sat, and dropped to one knee in front of her chair. Not proposing, not quite, just bringing himself to her level. "I'm not asking you to marry me, Catherine. I'm asking if you'd be willing to let me court you, properly, the way you deserve." "I'm ruined," Catherine said. "Exiled. I slapped you in front of half of London." "I know. It's one of the things I admire most about you. Your mother would have a stroke. My mother has survived worse. Society would tear us apart. Let them try." His hand found hers, warm and solid. "I'm not the man you met in that ballroom, Catherine. These months, your letters, your honesty, they've changed me, made me see how hollow my life was. How hollow I was." Catherine looked down at their joined hands, at this impossible man kneeling in her shabby parlor, offering her everything she'd been taught to want and nothing she'd expected to feel. "This is insane," she whispered. "Probably. It'll never work. Maybe not. I don't even like you very much yet." "Fair enough." He smiled, and it transformed his face completely. "But I like you tremendously. And I think, given time, you might find me tolerable." Catherine wanted to laugh and cry and scream all at once. This couldn't be happening. Dukes didn't court ruined spinsters. Fairy tales didn't come true for women who'd been exiled to Yorkshire moors. But his hand was real, and his eyes were sincere. And for the first time in her life, Catherine was being offered a choice that was actually hers to make. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course. And if I say yes, if this has to be real, not some aristocratic whim you'll tire of when society pushes back." "I promise you," Adrian said quietly, "I have never been more serious about anything in my life." He stood then, helped her to her feet, and they stood there in the fading afternoon light, two people who'd met as enemies and somehow become something else entirely. "Stay for dinner at least," Catherine found herself saying. "You've come all this way." His smile was answer enough. They talked through the evening, through a simple meal Catherine cobbled together, through hours that passed like minutes. And somewhere between the tea and the twilight, Catherine felt the last of her resistance crumbling. This was madness. This was impossible. This might actually be real. Adrian left the next morning, but the world he left behind was different than the one he'd arrived to. Catherine stood at the cottage door, watching his carriage disappear into the gray moors, and felt the weight of what she'd agreed to settle over her shoulders like a lead cloak. She hadn't said yes to his courtship. Not exactly, but she hadn't said no either, and that was answer enough for both of them. "You've lost your mind," Mrs. Bramwell said from behind her. The older woman had arrived just after dawn, ostensibly to deliver fresh bread, but really to assess the damage. "Probably," Catherine agreed, closing the door against the November wind. "A duke! You're letting a duke court you, the same duke who—" "I know who he is." Catherine moved to the kitchen, needing something to do with her hands. She grabbed the kettle, filled it from the pump. "I was there when it happened, remember?" "Then you should know better." Mrs. Bramwell's voice was sharp. "Men like that don't change. They play at reform, at being different. Then they go back to their real lives and forget all about the little experiments they tried in the countryside." The words hit harder than they should have. Catherine had spent half the night telling herself the same things. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "But maybe you're not. And if I am right, what then?" Mrs. Bramwell crossed her arms. "You let yourself care, let yourself hope, and then he goes back to London and marries some appropriate girl, and you're left here with a broken heart on top of your ruined reputation." "Then I'll survive it." Catherine turned to face her friend. "The same way I've survived everything else." Mrs. Bramwell's expression softened slightly. "I just don't want to see you hurt worse than you already have been." "I know, but I'm choosing this with my eyes open." Catherine poured hot water over tea leaves, watching them unfurl. "For the first time in my life, I'm choosing something for myself. Not because it's safe or appropriate or what I'm supposed to do, because I want it. Even knowing it might destroy you, especially knowing that." They sat in silence after that, drinking tea while the wind rattled the windows. Finally, Mrs. Bramwell stood to leave. "Just promise me something," she said at the door. "If this goes wrong, if he turns out to be what I think he is, you'll remember you have friends here, that you're not as alone as you think." Catherine felt her throat tighten. "I promise." After Mrs. Bramwell left, Catherine tried to return to her normal routine. Chores needed doing, the garden needed preparing for deeper winter, firewood needed chopping. But her mind kept drifting back to the evening before, to Adrian's words, his hands in hers, the impossible thing he'd offered. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the rider approaching. It was one of the village boys, maybe 14, on a pony that looked half dead from hard riding. He pulled up in front of the cottage, breathing hard. "Miss Hale," he gasped. "Message from the village. Mrs. Bramwell said to come quick." Catherine's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "Strangers asking questions. London men," she said. "Looking for you." The kettle slipped from Catherine's hand, hit the floor with a crash that sent hot water spreading across the stones. "When?" she asked. "Hour ago, maybe." "They're at the inn now." The boy shifted nervously. "Mrs. Bramwell says they have papers. Legal papers." Catherine's mind raced. Legal papers could mean anything, debt collectors maybe, or investigators hired by her father. But her instincts screamed it was something worse. "Thank you," she managed. "Tell Mrs. Bramwell I'm—" She stopped. Tell her what? That she was running? Hiding? She didn't even know yet what she was going to do. The boy was still waiting, clearly hoping for a coin she didn't have to give him. Catherine grabbed one of the few pennies from the jar on the shelf. "Go," she said. pressing it into his hand. Quickly. After he left, Catherine stood in her kitchen, hot water soaking into her shoes, and tried to think past the panic. London men with papers. It could be nothing. Could be something. But coming the day after Adrian's visit felt like too much coincidence. She was still trying to decide what to do when she heard the second set of hoofbeats. This time it was multiple riders. Catherine's heart hammered as she moved to the window. 3 men on horseback, all wearing the kind of clothes that marked them as from London. Their horses were good quality, well fed, not the kind of men who came north for casual business. Behind them, rattling up the rough track, came a closed carriage. Catherine recognized the crest on the door before she could stop herself. Her father's carriage. "No," she breathed. "No, this can't be." The men dismounted. One of them, tall, gray-haired, with the bearing of a former military man, approached the door. His knock was loud and official. "Miss Catherine Ashford," he called. "I am Mr. Reginald Thorne, representing your father, Lord Ashford. Please open the door." Catherine didn't move. Couldn't move. Her mind was screaming at her to run, but her feet might as well have been nailed to the floor. "Miss Ashford, we know you're inside. We merely wish to speak with you about a matter of some urgency. Your family is concerned for your welfare." Welfare. The word sent ice through her veins. She knew what this was. Had heard the stories from other women. Inconvenient daughters locked away in private hospitals, declared unstable by doctors paid to see exactly what the family needed them to see. "I'm not opening the door," Catherine called back, proud that her voice came out steady. "Whatever business you have, you can conduct it from there." A pause. Then Thorne's voice again, more clipped. "Miss Ashford, I have documents signed by your father, granting him authority to ensure your proper care. You've been living in isolation, reportedly corresponding inappropriately with a man far above your station. Your family fears you may be suffering from delusions brought on by solitude." "I'm not delusional," Catherine said. "I'm exiled. There's a difference. Nevertheless, we have a physician with us who is prepared to make an assessment. If you open the door willingly, this can be handled with dignity. If you refuse—" "If I refuse what?" Catherine's fear was hardening into anger now. "You'll break down my door? Drag me out by force? I'd like to see the magistrate's signature on that authority." Another pause, longer this time. Catherine heard low voices conferring outside. Then a new voice, one that made her blood run cold. "Catherine, it's your father. Open the door." Lord Ashford sounded tired, almost sad. That was somehow worse than if he'd sounded angry. "I'm trying to help you," he continued. "You've become isolated, obsessed with a fantasy that can never be. The Duke was kind to you out of guilt, nothing more. Now you're embarrassing yourself and damaging your sister's prospects. Let us help you before this gets worse." "Margaret's prospects are her own concern," Catherine said. "The Pembertons are threatening to break the engagement. Because of you. Because of the scandal you keep creating." Her father's voice hardened. "I gave you one chance, Catherine. I let you have your exile, your independence. You've proven you can't handle it responsibly." Catherine backed away from the door, her mind racing. The cottage had 2 doors, front and back, windows, but they were small and high. If they really intended to take her by force, she had maybe minutes to figure out what to do. She grabbed her cloak from its hook, shoved her feet into boots. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely tie the laces. "Miss Ashford," Thorne's voice again. "We're prepared to enter the residence if necessary. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Catherine ran for the back door, her heart in her throat. She got it open just as she heard the front door crash inward. They'd stopped asking permission. The back garden was small, bordered by a low stone wall. Beyond it, the moors stretched out in gray-brown waves. No cover, nowhere to hide, but at least it was space to run. She was halfway over the wall when a hand caught her arm. One of the men, younger, faster than she'd expected, had circled around. He grabbed her roughly, yanking her backward. "Let go of me!" Catherine twisted, fought, got one arm free and swung wild. Her fist connected with something, his jaw maybe, and he cursed, loosened his grip just enough. She pulled free and ran. The moors in November were treacherous, frozen ground hidden under dead grass, ice patches waiting to turn an ankle, wind that cut through clothing like it wasn't there. Catherine ran anyway, her breath burning, her legs pumping. Behind her, shouting, more than one person chasing now. She risked a glance back and saw three of them. The young one she'd hit, Thorn, and another man. They were gaining. Catherine pushed harder, her lungs screaming. She could see a farmhouse in the distance, maybe 2 miles away. If she could just reach it, find help. Her foot caught on something hidden in the grass. She went down hard, her hands and knees slamming into frozen earth. Pain shot up her arms, but she scrambled up, kept running. They were closer now. Close enough she could hear their breathing. "Miss Ashford, stop!" Thorne's voice, closer than it should be. "You're only making this harder on yourself." She wasn't going to make it to the farmhouse. Wasn't going to make it anywhere. Then, impossibly, she heard different hoofbeats. Coming from the north, fast and hard. A single rider pushing his horse at a gallop that looked barely controlled on the rough ground. Catherine's legs gave out. She went down again. This time, couldn't get up. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't do anything but watch the rider approach. The horse was black. Enormous. The rider wore a dark coat and rode like someone who'd been born in the saddle. Adrian. He reached her before her pursuers did, the horse sliding to a stop that kicked up frozen mud and dead grass. He dismounted in one fluid motion. "Get up," he said, reaching for her. His voice was calm, but his eyes were wild. "Catherine, get up. Now." She let him pull her to standing, her legs shaking so badly she could barely hold her weight. Her hands were bleeding where she'd fallen, her knees screaming. "How did you know?" Later. "Can you ride?" Thorne and his men were maybe 50 yards away now, slowing as they saw Adrian. "Yes," Catherine lied. Adrian lifted her onto his horse like she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her, taking the reins, and she felt his heart hammering against her back. Thorne had stopped, was standing there breathing hard. "Your Grace," he said, trying for respect but not quite achieving it. "This doesn't concern you." "Anything involving Miss Hale concerns me," Adrian said. His voice had gone cold, aristocratic. The voice of a man used to being obeyed. "And you are trespassing on land that borders my northern estates. We have legal authority." "From whom? Show me the magistrate's seal." Thorne hesitated. "Lord Ashford has the right to ensure his daughter's welfare." "Catherine Ashford is 26 years old and of sound mind. She requires no guardian." Adrian's hands tightened on the reins. "Now step aside." "I'm afraid I can't do that, Your Grace." "Then I'm afraid you're going to have a problem." The young man who'd caught Catherine earlier was reaching for something at his belt. A pistol, Catherine realized with horror. Adrian saw it too. He wheeled the horse around, away from the men, and kicked it into motion. They took off at a gallop that should have been suicidal on the treacherous ground. Catherine gripped the saddle and tried not to scream. Behind them, someone was shouting. She heard a gunshot crack across the moor. Warning shot, maybe, or aimed to kill. Hard to tell over the thunder of hooves and her own hammering heart. Adrian guided them north and east, following terrain only he seemed to see. The horse was already tiring, its breath coming in great heaving gasps. They couldn't keep this pace much longer. "Where are we going?" Catherine shouted over the wind. "Mrs. Bramwell sent word to a friend of hers. Farmer named Hendricks. He's expecting us." Another gunshot, closer this time. The bullet whistled past somewhere to their left. "They're shooting at us," Catherine said, her voice high and thin with panic. "They're shooting around us," Adrian corrected, trying to spook the horse. "Hold on." He took them down a steep embankment at an angle that defied physics, the horse half sliding through loose scree. Catherine felt herself slipping, scrabbled for purchase, felt Adrian's arm lock around her waist to hold her in place. They hit the bottom and the horse stumbled, nearly went down. Adrian controlled it somehow, one hand still wrapped around Catherine to keep her from falling, the other managing the reins. "Almost there," he said in her ear. "Just a bit further." The farmhouse appeared as they crested the next hill. Stone walls, smoke rising from the chimney, several outbuildings. And in the yard, 4 men with rifles, clearly waiting. Adrian's horse was staggering now, foam flecking its mouth. They made it to the farmyard, and the animal collapsed the moment Adrian dismounted, sides heaving. He pulled Catherine down after him, held her upright when her legs refused to support her. The gray-haired man, who must be Hendricks, stepped forward, rifle cradled in his arms like he knew how to use it. "You're Bramwell's girl?" he asked Catherine. She nodded, couldn't speak. "And you're the Duke?" "I am," Adrian said. Good enough. Hendricks turned to his men. Nobody gets on this property without my say-so. I don't care who they claim to be. Thorne and the others appeared at the top of the hill moments later. They stayed there, just out of rifle range, clearly assessing the situation. Catherine watched them from the shelter of Adrian's arms, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and terror, and the dawning realization of what had just happened.
They were going to lock me away, she said. My own father was going to have me committed to an asylum. I know. Adrian's voice was tight with controlled rage. I got word this morning from a friend in London. Your father's been consulting with doctors, getting statements about your unstable behavior. Rode straight through to get here. How did you even know where to find me? Mrs. Bramwell.
She sent a message to my London house 2 days ago, said she was worried about men asking questions in the village. I left immediately. He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. I should have stayed, should have known they'd move this fast. You couldn't have known. I should have. One of her father's men was dismounting now, clearly planning to approach on foot. Hendricks raised his rifle. That's close enough, he called. This is private property. You have no authority here. We have documents, Thorne shouted back. Legal authority to collect Miss Ashford for her own protection. Don't see any magistrate with you, Hendricks replied, and I know the law. You can't force anyone off my land without proper procedure and an officer of the court. Thorne stood there for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Behind him, Catherine could see the carriage, could see a shape in the window that had to be her father, watching this unfold. We'll return with proper authorities, Thorne finally said. This isn't over. Looking forward to it, Hendricks called back. The men retreated to the carriage, but they didn't leave, just pulled back about 100 yards and clearly settled in to wait. They'll go for a magistrate, Hendricks said, lowering his rifle. Could be here by morning with the proper papers. And if they convince a doctor to sign off that you're a danger to yourself, he shook his head. Won't matter that you're clearly sane as anyone. Law is on their side. Then we leave before morning, Adrian said. Go where? Catherine asked. Her voice was shaking. Everywhere in England my father has connections. Legal right to have me committed if he can convince a doctor I'm unstable. And after what I did, slapping you in public, refusing to obey my family, running away, how hard will that be? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. When he spoke, his voice was careful. We could go to Scotland. Catherine's heart stopped. Scotland. Gretna Green specifically. We could be married under Scottish law without your father's permission or any waiting period. He pulled back enough to look at her face. I know it's not how you'd want it. No ceremony, no time to prepare, but it would put you legally under my protection. Your father couldn't touch you then. You're asking me to marry you. I'm offering you a way out. That's not the same thing. I know. His hands tightened on her shoulders. And if there was any other option, any way to keep you safe without forcing this choice, I'd take it. But Catherine, they will lock you away. And once you're committed, it could be years before anyone could get you out, if ever. She looked past him to where her father's carriage sat on the hill, a dark shape against the darkening sky. Looked at the armed men around her, at Hendricks's grim face, at the impossible situation her defiance had created. If we do this, she said slowly, if we marry, it has to be real, not just legal protection. I won't be your duty or your charity case or your act of rebellion against your mother. You've never been any of those things. Haven't I? How do I know this isn't just guilt or some aristocratic notion of honor? Adrian's laugh was rough. If this was about honor, I would have married Victoria Covington weeks ago like my mother wanted. If it was about guilt, I would have sent you money and tried to forget you existed. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. This is about the fact that for 3 months, your letters have been the only honest thing in my life. That I've read them so many times I've memorized whole passages. That I rode through the night because the thought of you being taken. He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. I care about you, he said finally, deeply. Possibly more than is wise given we've spent maybe 10 hours actually in each other's presence. But there it is. Catherine felt tears on her face and couldn't remember starting to cry. This is insane. Probably. Your mother will disown you. She'll try. She won't succeed.
Society will never accept it. They'll have no choice. You'll be a duchess, my duchess. They can whisper all they want, but they'll bow when you enter a room, or I'll make their lives very difficult. Catherine thought about the cottage, about the life she'd built in exile, thought about the asylum waiting for her if she refused, thought about this man who'd ridden through the night to save her from her own family. It wasn't the choice she'd wanted.
It wasn't even close to the life she'd imagined, but it was the only choice she had.
All right,
she whispered. Yes. The relief that washed over Adrian's face was almost painful to see. He pulled her against his chest, and Catherine felt him shaking, from exhaustion or emotion, she couldn't tell. Hendricks cleared his throat. Hate to interrupt, but we need to plan. They're waiting out there for a reason. Could be reinforcements coming, could be they're planning an ambush on the North Road. Adrian pulled back, his face settling into grim determination. How far to the Scottish border? 3 days hard riding if you go direct, but they'll expect that. Hendricks stroked his beard, thinking. You'd do better to go south first, make them think you're running back to London, then circle west to the coast and up through Cumberland. Longer route, but less predictable.
That's 4 days minimum, Adrian said. 4 days where you're alive and ahead of them, Hendricks countered. Or 2 days riding into whatever trap they've set. Your choice. They argued strategy while Hendricks' wife, a practical woman named Sarah, appeared with food, dry clothes for Catherine, everything they'd need for a hard journey. She didn't ask questions, just pressed a packet of bandages and salve into Catherine's hands for her torn palms and knees.
You'll want to leave before midnight, Hendricks said eventually. Full moon tonight. You'll be able to see well enough to ride if you're careful. Catherine changed into the borrowed men's clothes. Rough wool trousers, a thick shirt, a coat that smelled of farm work and sweat. They were too big, but practical for riding. She bound her bleeding hands, tried to ignore the way her knees screamed every time she moved. In the barn, Adrian was checking weapons with the efficiency of someone who'd done it before. Pistols, rifles, powder, and shot. More than Catherine had expected. Do you know how to use these? She asked. My father believed every gentleman should know how to hunt. Adrian's smile was grim. I was never very good at it, but I can hit what I aim at when it matters. And if they shoot back, then we ride faster. They ate mechanically, bread, cheese, cold meat that Catherine's stomach wanted to reject. But she forced it down, knowing she'd need the strength. At 11, Hendricks came to find them. Your father's men pulled back about an hour ago, he said. Took the carriage and went south. Catherine's skin prickled. Why would they leave? They had us trapped. That's what worries me, Hendricks said. Either they're going for reinforcements or they're setting up somewhere on the route they think we'll take, Adrian finished. He swore under his breath, which means the direct route to Scotland is definitely compromised. Could be worse, Hendricks said. Could be they're setting up on multiple routes. Your father's got money. He can hire enough men to cover the main roads. Catherine felt the walls closing in. So what do we do? We go where they don't expect, Adrian said. Sarah, you said you have family in Carlisle? Hendricks's wife nodded. My sister runs an inn near the coast. Can we trust her? With my life. Then we go there first, rest the horses, get supplies, figure out the final route to Gretna Green. Adrian looked at Catherine. It means 5 days instead of 4. Can you manage it? She thought about her father, about the asylum, about everything she'd lose if she said no. I can manage. And at midnight they mounted fresh horses, a roan mare for Catherine, a big bay gelding for Adrian. The animals were nervous, sensing the tension. Catherine's mare danced sideways, and it took all her limited riding skill to keep her seat. Adrian carried a pistol in his belt and a rifle strapped to his saddle. Catherine had the knife Hendricks had given her, though she had no idea if she'd actually be able to use it if it came to that. Hendricks walked them to the edge of his property. His men had been watching the roads, the hilltops, looking for signs of ambush. They'd seen nothing, which somehow made Catherine more nervous rather than less. Your aunt would be proud of you, Hendricks said to Catherine. Judith was a fighter, never let anyone cage her, even when they tried. The words settled something in Catherine's chest. She nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Go now, Hendricks said, and ride like hell. They went south initially, following a sheep track that barely qualified as a path. The moon was bright enough to see by, painting the moors in silver and shadow. Every rock became a potential enemy, every movement in the grass a threat. Catherine's mare handled the rough ground better than she'd expected. The animal was sure-footed, responsive, willing to trust Catherine's inexperienced guidance. Small blessing in a night full of terrors. They rode for 2 hours before Adrian called a halt at a stream. The horses drank while Catherine tried to work feeling back into her frozen fingers. "How are you holding up?" Adrian asked quietly. "I'm terrified and my hands hurt, and I think I might be sick," Catherine said, "but I'm still upright. That's all that matters." They remounted and continued west now, angling toward the coast. The landscape changed gradually. Less open moor, more rocky outcroppings, valleys that could hide a dozen men waiting in ambush. Catherine kept expecting to hear hoofbeats behind them, to see riders appearing on the hilltops. But the night stayed empty, just wind and moonlight and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. Dawn found them in a narrow valley, following a river that would eventually lead to the sea. Catherine was swaying in the saddle, exhaustion and pain making her clumsy. Her hands had started bleeding again through the bandages. "We need to stop," Adrian said. "Find somewhere to rest for a few hours. They could be following, and if you fall off your horse, they won't need to catch us. You'll have broken your neck for them." He was right. Catherine knew he was right. But the thought of stopping, of being stationary and vulnerable, made her skin crawl. They found a shepherd's hut tucked into the hillside, abandoned, half collapsed, but with enough roof left to provide shelter. Adrian got the horses hidden in a depression behind the structure while Catherine forced herself to stay awake long enough to check for signs anyone else had been here recently. Nothing. Just stone and old straw and the smell of sheep. She sank down against the wall and was asleep before Adrian came back inside. She woke to the sound of hoofbeats. Catherine's eyes snapped open, her heart already racing. Adrian was at the gap in the wall that served as a window, his rifle ready. "How many?" she whispered. 4, maybe 5. His voice was tight. "They're searching, systematically." Catherine forced herself to move, to crawl to where she could see out. Sure enough, riders were working their way up the valley, checking every structure, every possible hiding place. "They know we came this way," she said. "Looks like it. Can we run?" "Not without them seeing us. The horses are too close." Adrian's jaw was set. "We wait. Hope they miss this place." They watched the riders approach. Catherine could see them clearly now. Rough men, hired muscle, the kind who didn't ask questions as long as the money was good. One of them was Thorne, directing the search. The group split up. 2 went north along the river, 2 south. Thorne stayed in the middle, his horse circling. He was maybe 100 yards from the hut when he stopped, looking directly at where they were hidden. Catherine stopped breathing. Thorne sat there for a long moment, scanning the hillside. Then he kicked his horse forward, straight toward them. "He sees us," Catherine whispered. "He suspects." Adrian's finger was on the trigger. Not the same thing. 50 yards. 40. Catherine's hand found the knife at her belt. It felt small and useless. 30 yards. Thorne slowed his horse, still looking. Then one of the other riders called out from the south. He'd found something, tracks maybe, or a cold campfire. Thorne hesitated, looked back at the hut one more time. "Come on," Catherine breathed. "Go, just go." After what felt like an eternity, Thorne wheeled his horse around and rode to join his man. They waited there for another hour, barely breathing, listening to the search continue around them. Finally, the riders moved on, heading south down the valley. "We need to go north," Adrian said. "Now. Before they realize those tracks aren't ours and double back." They moved fast, getting the horses, mounting up despite Catherine's screaming muscles. Her hands were bleeding freely now, the bandages soaked through. She didn't care. They were alive and ahead of the pursuit, and that was all that mattered. The next 3 days blurred together into a nightmare of hard riding, cold camps, and constant fear. They slept in snatches, never more than a few hours, always with one of them keeping watch. Catherine's body began to break down, her hands infected despite the salve, her knees swollen, exhaustion making her clumsy and stupid. But they kept moving. Adrian proved to be more than she'd expected. He knew how to navigate by the stars, how to find water, how to stretch their supplies. He tended her wounds with gentle efficiency, never mentioning how they were slowing them down. At night, when the cold got bad, he held her while they slept, sharing warmth. They talked sometimes, in whispers, about inconsequential things at first, favorite books, childhood memories, then deeper things. He told her about his father's death, the crushing weight of inheriting a title at 23. She told him about growing up invisible, about learning to make herself smaller and smaller until she almost disappeared. "I won't let you disappear," he said one night. "Not ever again." Catherine wanted to believe him. On the fourth day, they reached Carlisle and Sarah's sister's inn. The woman took one look at them, filthy, exhausted. Catherine barely able to stand and asked no questions. Just got them into a back room, brought hot water and clean clothes and food. "Rest today?" she said. "You look half dead." "We can't," Adrian said. "We're too close now. One more day to Gretna Green. One more day won't matter if she collapses." Catherine wanted to argue, but her body had other ideas. She was asleep before she could finish the thought. She woke to darkness and the sound of raised voices outside. Adrian was at the window, his whole body tense. Catherine forced herself to get up, to move to his side. In the inn yard, lit by torches, were at least a dozen riders, and standing in the center of them, looking up at their window with an expression that made Catherine's blood run cold, was her father. Catherine's father stood in the torchlight like a figure from a nightmare, his face set in stone, surrounded by enough men to start a small war. "We can't run," Adrian said quietly. His hand found hers in the darkness. "Not anymore. We're too close to the border, and they know it. They'll be watching every road north." Catherine's mind raced through options, each one worse than the last. Fight their way out, impossible with a dozen armed men. Sneak away. Her father would have men watching the back exits. Wait for morning, and give him time to get a magistrate. Make this legal. "There's another option," she said slowly. Adrian looked at her. "We go down there. We face him." Catherine: "He wants me to be afraid, wants me to run so he can say I'm unstable, hysterical, proving his case." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "What if I don't give him that? He has a dozen men. And you're a duke." Catherine turned to face Adrian fully. "You have power too. Use it." A long silence. Then Adrian's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're either brilliant or completely mad," he said. "Probably both." They went down together, Catherine forcing herself to walk slowly despite every instinct screaming at her to run. Her hands were still bandaged, her clothes borrowed and ill-fitting, her hair a disaster. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd been running for her life for 4 days. But she held her head up. The inn's common room had cleared out, the other guests either fled or hiding. Sarah's sister stood behind the bar, her face carefully neutral. Smart woman. Didn't want to be involved in whatever was about to happen. Lord Ashford waited by the door, thorn at his shoulder. The rest of his men stayed outside, a visible threat. Catherine's father looked older than she remembered, thinner. There were new lines around his mouth, gray in his hair that hadn't been there 6 months ago. For just a moment, she felt something like pity. Then he spoke. "Catherine, thank heaven you're safe." His voice was warm, concerned, fatherly. It was masterful. Anyone listening would think he was a worried parent relieved to find his lost daughter. "I'm perfectly safe," Catherine said. "You're clearly exhausted, injured." His eyes moved to her bandaged hands, and something flickered in his expression. "Whatever the Duke has told you, whatever promises he's made, you must know they're not real. Men like him don't marry women like you." The words were designed to hurt. They did, a little, but Catherine had heard worse. "Men like him," she repeated. "You mean dukes? Or do you mean men with honor?" Her father's jaw tightened. "I mean men who understand their position in society, who know that taking advantage of a vulnerable, isolated woman is—" "I haven't taken advantage of anyone." Adrian's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stepped forward, putting himself slightly in front of Catherine. "And I'd suggest you choose your next words very carefully, Lord Ashford." "Your Grace." Her father's tone shifted, became more deferential. "You're a young man, and you've been kind to my daughter out of a sense of guilt over an unfortunate incident. That kindness is admirable, But surely you can see that this situation is inappropriate. Catherine has been living alone, her judgment impaired by isolation. Her judgment is perfectly sound, Adrian interrupted. More sound than yours, apparently. She struck you in public, fled from her family, led you on a chase across half of England. Her father spread his hands. These are not the actions of a rational person. No, Adrian agreed. They're the actions of a desperate person, because you were planning to have her committed to an asylum based on fabricated evidence of instability. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. That's a serious accusation, Thorne said. It's the truth. Adrian's voice was cold. I have statements from 3 of the doctors Lord Ashford consulted, men willing to diagnose Miss Hale as hysterical and dangerous without ever meeting her. For a fee, of course. Catherine stared at him. She'd had no idea he'd been gathering evidence. Her father's face had gone pale. Those doctors were consulted in good faith. Those doctors were bought, Adrian said. And you know it. You were willing to lock your daughter away to protect your son's prospects and save your family from scandal. Except it won't work, because I'm not letting you take her. You have no legal authority. I have enough authority to make your life extremely difficult. Adrian took another step forward. I can call in your debts, every single one. I can block Thomas's commission, ruin Margaret's engagement, ensure no one in London will receive you. I can make you a pariah, Lord Ashford, and I will, if you try to take Catherine. The silence that followed was absolute. Catherine watched her father's face cycle through emotions, shock, anger, calculation. He'd expected Adrian to back down, she realized. Expected the Duke to choose his reputation over a ruined spinster. He'd miscalculated badly. This is madness, her father said finally. Your Grace, I understand you feel some misplaced sense of responsibility, but you cannot throw away your position for a girl with no fortune, no connections, no— I'm going to marry her, Adrian said flatly. Tomorrow, if possible, at Gretna Green under Scottish law. And then she will be a duchess, and you will have no claim on her whatsoever. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Catherine saw her father's hands clench, saw Thorne shift his weight. The men outside were still there, still armed. This could turn ugly fast. Father, she said quietly. He looked at her, and for a moment she saw something raw in his face. Pain, maybe, or regret. I know the family is drowning in debt, she continued. I know Thomas's gambling has made it worse. I know Margaret's marriage to Pemberton is the only thing keeping you afloat. She took a breath. I'm sorry my scandal has made things harder, truly, but I won't let you lock me away to fix it. You're my daughter, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. I'm trying to protect you. No, you're trying to control me. There's a difference. Catherine. I spent 26 years being invisible because that's what you needed, she said. I was quiet, obedient, acceptable. I disappeared into the background so Margaret could shine and Thomas could do whatever he pleased. And where did it get me? You were still ashamed of me, still wished I didn't exist. That's not true. Isn't it? Catherine felt tears on her face but kept talking. When did you last ask me what I wanted, what I thought? When did you ever care about anything except how I reflected on the family name? Her father opened his mouth, closed it. No answer came. I'm leaving, Catherine said. With Adrian, to Scotland. And you can either accept that with some dignity, or you can make this uglier than it needs to be. But either way, I'm leaving. She waited, barely breathing, for his response. Lord Ashford looked between her and Adrian, his face working. Outside, one of the horses whinnied. Someone coughed. The debts, he said finally, quietly. If I let you go, if I give my blessing, can anything be done about the debts? Catherine's heart sank. Of course it came down to money. But Adrian surprised her. I'll settle the most pressing ones, he said, enough to keep your creditors from knocking, and I'll ensure Thomas gets his commission. But that's all, and it's contingent on you leaving Catherine alone, permanently. And Margaret's engagement? I'll speak to Pemberton personally. Make it clear that Catherine's marriage to me is a love match, not a scandal. It might actually help Margaret's prospects. Connection to the Blackthorn name, even through a sister-in-law, has value. Lord Ashford stood there for a long moment, clearly calculating. Catherine watched the gears turn behind his eyes, watched him weigh his options. Very well, he said finally. You have my blessing, for whatever that's worth. It was worth nothing, and they all knew it. But it was also the best they were going to get. We'll need it in writing, Adrian said. A letter giving permission for the marriage. Tonight. You don't trust my word? Not even slightly. Her father's mouth thinned, but he nodded. Thorne, get paper and ink. They drafted the letter there in the common room, Adrian dictating terms while Thorne wrote and Lord Ashford signed with a hand that shook slightly. Permission for Catherine Ashford to marry Adrian Blackthorne, Duke of Blackthorne. Acknowledgement that she was of sound mind and acting of her own free will. Release from all parental authority. It was done in 10 minutes. Catherine held the paper in her bandaged hands and felt the weight of her entire life shift. I should say something, her father said as he prepared to leave. Something fatherly. But I don't know what. Then don't, Catherine said. He nodded, looking older than ever. Then he was gone, taking his men with him, leaving Catherine and Adrian standing in the empty inn. Sarah's sister emerged from the back room. Well, she said, that was dramatic. Catherine started laughing. She couldn't help it. 4 days of running, of terror, of expecting death or worse around every corner, and it ended with her father signing a piece of paper in exchange for money. Are you all right? Adrian asked, concerned. I don't know, Catherine said honestly. Ask me tomorrow. They left at first light, just the two of them now. No pursuers, no threats, just an easy ride north through countryside that grew prettier as they approached the border. Gretna Green was smaller than Catherine expected, barely more than a village clustered around a few key buildings. But it was the first place over the Scottish border, which made it the destination for every runaway couple in England. The blacksmith who conducted marriages was a jovial man named McTavish, who'd clearly seen every variation of desperate couple imaginable. He looked at Catherine's bandaged hands and Adrian's exhausted face and didn't ask questions. English? He asked. Painfully so, Adrian said. Running from someone? Not anymore, McTavish nodded. Good enough. You have witnesses? They didn't. McTavish called in his wife and his apprentice, both of whom looked delighted to be part of the drama. The ceremony was brief, practical, utterly unromantic. McTavish read the words, they repeated them. He pronounced them married under Scottish law. Just like that, Catherine Ashford became Catherine Blackthorne, Duchess of Blackthorne. She waited to feel different, transformed, something. Instead, she just felt tired. They spent their wedding night in a small inn, in a room with a slanted ceiling and a window that looked out over green hills. Adrian had asked if she wanted separate rooms, but Catherine had said no. They were married now, legally and truly. Might as well start acting like it. But when they climbed into bed, Adrian just held her. No pressure, no expectations, just warmth and the steady rhythm of his breathing. Thank you, Catherine said into the darkness. For what? For riding through the night, for standing up to my father, for not making me feel like this was a mistake. It's not a mistake. His arms tightened around her. But it is terrifying. For you too? Absolutely. My mother is going to have a stroke. Society is going to lose its collective mind. And I have no idea if this is going to work. If we're going to work, when we're not running for our lives. Catherine rolled over to face him. In the dim light from the window, she could just make out his features. We'll figure it out, she said. You sound confident. I'm good at pretending. He laughed at that and kissed her forehead, and they fell asleep tangled together like they'd been doing it for years. They stayed in Gretna Green for 3 days, letting Catherine's hands heal, letting the exhaustion fade. They talked about what came next, returning to London, facing his mother, presenting Catherine to society as the new Duchess. She's going to hate me, Catherine said. Probably, Adrian agreed. She has very specific ideas about who I should have married. Someone young and beautiful and accomplished. Someone controllable. He smiled grimly. She's going to be very disappointed. On the 3rd day, Adrian received a letter from London. His mother had heard about the marriage. News traveled fast when it was this scandalous, and demanded they return immediately. Do we have to? Catherine asked. Eventually, but not yet. Adrian folded the letter. I think we should take the long way home. Let society stew for a while. Let them build up their expectations so we can demolish them more thoroughly. They traveled south slowly, taking their time. Adrian showed her parts of northern England she'd never seen, lakes that looked like mirrors, mountains that took her breath away, ancient castles crumbling into romantic ruin. In a village in the Lake District, they stopped at a small church. Adrian went inside while Catherine waited and came back with a simple gold ring. "It's not much," he said, slipping it onto her finger. "But you should have something." The ring fit perfectly. Catherine stared at it, this physical proof that she was married, that she'd escaped. "It's perfect," she said. They made their way toward London over the course of 2 weeks, and with each mile south, Catherine felt the reality of what she'd done settle over her like a cloak. She was a duchess now, would be presented at court, would have to navigate society as one of its highest-ranking women. The invisible spinster who'd been mocked and dismissed would now be bowed to, deferred to, treated with the respect her new position demanded. The irony was almost funny. They stopped one last night before London, at a coaching inn 40 miles from the city. Catherine couldn't sleep, kept pacing the room until Adrian caught her hand. "What's wrong?" he asked. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Your mother, society, all of it. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough to be what you need me to be? You slapped me in front of 200 people, defied your father, and ran across half of England to escape being locked in an asylum," Adrian said. "You're the strongest person I know." That was different. That was survival. So is this. He pulled her down to sit beside him. "Catherine, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to win everyone over. You just have to be yourself, the woman who was brave enough to choose her own path. And if that's not enough, then they don't deserve you." The words settled something in Catherine's chest. She leaned against his shoulder, let herself take comfort in his certainty, even as her own wavered. "Tell me about your mother," she said. "I should know what I'm walking into." Adrian sighed. "Eleanor Blackthorne, Dowager Duchess. She's formidable, brilliant, and utterly convinced that she knows what's best for everyone around her. My father's death devastated her, but she hid it behind increased control of everything she could reach, especially me. She wanted you to marry Victoria Covington. She wanted me to marry someone she'd chosen, someone young enough to be molded into her vision of the perfect duchess, someone who wouldn't challenge her authority in the household. I'm going to be a terrible disappointment. You're going to be a revelation." Adrian smiled. She's expecting some desperate social climber. Instead, she's getting a woman who doesn't give a damn about impressing her. It's going to drive her mad. They arrived in London on a gray November afternoon, the city shrouded in coal smoke and mist. Adrian's townhouse was in Mayfair, enormous and elegant, the kind of building Catherine had only ever seen from the outside. Now it was her home. The servants were lined up in the entrance hall, clearly having been warned of their arrival. Catherine saw the barely concealed shock on their faces as Adrian introduced her as the new Duchess. She was wearing one of the plain dresses from Yorkshire, her hands still bandaged, her hair simply braided. She looked nothing like what they'd expected. Good. The butler, an elderly man named Morrison, recovered first. "Your Grace," he said to Catherine, bowing deeply. "Welcome home." The word sent a strange thrill through her. Home. This was her home now. Adrian showed her through the house, drawing rooms and dining rooms, and a library that made Catherine's breath catch. So many books. More books than she'd seen in her entire life. "You can change anything you want," Adrian said. "It's your house now, too." "I wouldn't know where to start." "Then don't, not yet." He took her hand. "There's someone you need to meet first." The Dowager Duchess was waiting in the blue drawing room, seated like a queen on a throne. She was smaller than Catherine expected, gray-haired and elegant, with eyes exactly like Adrian's, gray and piercing and missing nothing. She looked at Catherine for a long moment. Catherine forced herself not to fidget, not to look away. This was the woman who could make her life miserable if she chose. But Catherine had faced worse. "So," the Dowager Duchess said finally, "you're the girl who slapped my son." "Yes, Your Grace," Catherine said, "and then married him in Scotland without my knowledge or permission." "Yes." Another long silence. Then, impossibly, the Dowager Duchess smiled. "Good," she said. He needed someone to shake him up. I was beginning to worry he'd never find someone with enough spine. Catherine felt the floor shift under her feet. What? Don't misunderstand me, the Dowager Duchess continued. I'm furious that you married without consulting me. Furious that you've created the scandal of the season. But she paused, studying Catherine's face. Victoria Covington would have been a disaster. Beautiful, yes. Accomplished, certainly. But she had no fire, no real strength. She would have let Adrian coast through life, never being challenged, never growing. Mother, Adrian said, sounding stunned. Oh, be quiet. I'm allowed to change my mind. The Dowager Duchess gestured at Catherine. Sit down, girl. You look like you're about to fall over. Catherine sat, her mind spinning. Now, the Dowager Duchess said, we need to talk strategy. Society is going to tear you apart if we let them. So we won't let them. We're going to present you as exactly what you are, a woman who refused to settle for less than she deserved. We'll host a ball, invite everyone who matters, and dare them to say a word against the new Duchess of Blackthorn. I don't know how to do any of this, Catherine said. I was invisible for 26 years. I don't know how to be seen. Then you'll learn. The Dowager Duchess's voice was firm but not unkind. And I'll teach you. Not because I approve of how this happened, I don't, but because you're family now, and we protect our own. Catherine felt tears threatening and blinked them back. She'd expected rejection, hostility. Not this. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me yet. I'm going to work you harder than you've ever been worked. The Dowager Duchess stood. We have 3 weeks until the ball. 3 weeks to turn you into a duchess that society has no choice but to respect. Think you can handle it? Catherine thought about Yorkshire, about running across the moors, about facing down her father, thought about everything she'd survived to get to this moment. Yes, she said, I can handle it. The Dowager Duchess's smile was sharp. We'll see. The next 3 weeks were brutal. Catherine was measured for new dresses, taught proper forms of address, drilled on the complicated hierarchy of society. The Dowager Duchess was a demanding teacher, correcting Catherine's posture, her speech, the way she held her teacup. But she was also fair, and sometimes, in unguarded moments, almost kind. You remind me of myself, she said one afternoon, before I learned to hide it. I had opinions once, fire. Then I married into this family and learned that duchesses are supposed to be decorative and silent. What happened to the fire? Catherine asked. I redirected it, became formidable instead of fiery, learned to control from behind the scenes. The Dowager Duchess looked at Catherine with something like regret. But you don't have to hide. Times are changing. Women are changing. You could be the kind of duchess I never got to be. The words stayed with Catherine through the endless fittings and lessons in preparation for the ball. 3 days before the event, a letter arrived from Margaret. Catherine almost didn't open it, expecting recriminations or demands. Instead, she found an apology. Catherine, I've been a terrible sister. I knew what father was planning, knew about the doctors and the asylum, and I said nothing. I told myself it was for your own good, that you needed help. But the truth is, I was scared that your scandal would ruin my chances, and I chose those chances over you. I'm sorry, truly. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that when I heard you'd escaped, that you'd married the Duke, I was relieved, grateful that you were safe. The Pembertons have actually been more interested in the match since news spread. Having a duchess for a sister-in-law has social value, apparently, so you didn't ruin my prospects. If anything, you've helped them. I hope you're happy. I hope he treats you well. You deserve that. Your sister, Margaret. Catherine read it twice, then folded it carefully. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough to make up for years of neglect and casual cruelty. But it was something. She wrote back briefly, wishing Margaret well. Then she returned to preparing for the ball that would introduce her to society as the new Duchess of Blackthorn. The night of the ball arrived cold and clear. Catherine stood in her new rooms, looking at herself in the mirror, and barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress was deep blue silk, cut to emphasize what curves she had while hiding her thinness. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had taken 2 hours. Jewels, Blackthorn family jewels, Adrian had said, glittered at her throat and ears. She looked like a duchess, felt like an imposter. "Stop that," the Dowager Duchess said, appearing in the doorway. "I can see you doubting yourself. Don't. You've earned this." "I slapped him," Catherine said. "That's how this started, with violence and scandal. And it's ending with you married to a man who adores you, standing on the edge of claiming the respect society should have given you years ago." The older woman crossed to Catherine, adjusted a curl. "They're going to stare. They're going to whisper. Let them. You're the Duchess of Blackthorn now. They have to bow whether they like it or not." Adrian appeared then, devastatingly handsome in his evening clothes. He stopped when he saw Catherine, his expression going soft. "You're beautiful," he said. "I'm terrified." "That too." He offered his arm. "Ready?" Catherine took a breath, settled her shoulders. "As I'll ever be." They descended the grand staircase together as the first guests were arriving. Catherine could feel the eyes on her, hear the whispers starting, but she kept her head up, her hand steady on Adrian's arm. The ballroom was transformed, flowers everywhere, hundreds of candles, an orchestra tuning up. It was beautiful and overwhelming, and Catherine wanted to run. But she didn't. She stood with Adrian and his mother, greeting guests as they arrived. Each introduction was a small battle, seeing them try to hide their shock, their disapproval, their naked curiosity about the woman who'd slapped a duke and somehow ended up married to him. The Covington family arrived fashionably late. Victoria was even more beautiful than Catherine remembered. Golden-haired, delicate, every inch the perfect aristocratic lady. She curtsied to Catherine with flawless grace. "Your Grace," she said, "congratulations on your marriage." There was no venom in it, no hidden barbs, just simple courtesy. "Thank you," Catherine said, surprised. When Victoria moved on, Adrian leaned close. "Told you she'd be gracious." "You really dodged a bullet there," Catherine muttered. "I really did." The evening progressed. Catherine danced, badly at first, but Adrian was patient, and the Dowager Duchess had drilled her enough that she managed not to embarrass herself. She made conversation with women who'd ignored her for years, watched them struggle to reconcile the invisible spinster with the Duchess she'd become. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Then, near midnight, the Dowager Duchess called for silence. "A toast," she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom, "to my son and his new bride. Their courtship was unconventional, certainly, but I have known Catherine for only 3 weeks, and in that time she has proven herself to be exactly the kind of woman this family needs. Intelligent, courageous, and unwilling to be diminished by anyone." The room went very quiet. "So I ask you all to join me," the Dowager Duchess continued, raising her glass, "in welcoming the new Duchess of Blackthorn. May she shake things up as thoroughly as she's shaken up my son." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, glasses rose. Not everyone. Catherine could see faces in the crowd that remained stubbornly hostile. But enough. More than enough. As the toast was drunk and conversation resumed, Catherine felt something shift. Not acceptance, not exactly, but recognition. She was here. She was real, and she wasn't going away. The invisible woman had finally, irrevocably become visible. The invisible woman had finally, irrevocably become visible. But visibility, Catherine learned in the weeks that followed, came with its own complications. The morning after the ball, she woke to find herself the subject of every gossip column in London. Most were cautiously positive. The Dowager Duchess's endorsement had been strategic and effective, but there were still plenty who questioned whether a disgraced spinster could truly transform into a proper duchess. "Listen to this one," Adrian said over breakfast, reading from one of the more vicious papers. "The new Duchess of Blackthorn may wear silks and jewels, but one cannot help but wonder if Yorkshire mud still clings to her shoes. Can a woman who spent months in exile truly understand the refined sensibilities required of her new position?" Catherine took the paper from his hands and tossed it into the fireplace. "I understand them perfectly. I just don't care about most of them." "That's what worries them," Adrian said, smiling. "You're supposed to be desperate for their approval." "I was desperate for approval for 26 years. Look where it got me." The Dowager Duchess entered the breakfast room, already dressed and formidable despite the early hour. "Stop reading that drivel," she said to Adrian. "And you," she pointed at Catherine, Have a full schedule today. We're calling on Lady Pemberton. Catherine's stomach dropped. Margaret's future mother-in-law? Precisely. She's been making noises about reconsidering the engagement. We're going to make it very clear that won't be happening. How? By reminding her that opposing a duchess, especially one with the Blackthorn name and fortune behind her, is spectacularly stupid. The visit to Lady Pemberton's Belgravia townhouse was everything Catherine had dreaded. The woman received them in her drawing room, her expression carefully neutral, but Catherine could see the calculation in her eyes. "Your Grace," Lady Pemberton said to the Dowager Duchess. Then, after a notable pause, "Your Grace," to Catherine. The slight was deliberate. Catherine felt her spine stiffen. "Lady Pemberton," the Dowager Duchess said smoothly, settling into a chair without waiting for invitation. "We've come to discuss your son's engagement to Catherine's sister Margaret." "Ah, yes." Lady Pemberton's smile was tight. "Given recent events, the family has been reconsidering whether the match is still appropriate." "Recent events," Catherine repeated. "You mean my marriage?" "Among other things, the scandal surrounding your situation has been quite pronounced. We have our family's reputation to consider." Catherine felt anger building but kept her voice level. "Lady Pemberton, let me be direct. Margaret is beautiful, accomplished, and kind. She will make your son an excellent wife. My scandalous marriage to a duke, if anything, enhances her prospects, not diminishes them. Some might say it raises questions about the family's stability. And some might say," the Dowager Duchess interjected, voice sharp as a blade, "that breaking an engagement over baseless gossip raises questions about your family's honor. The Ashfords have their struggles, certainly, but Margaret is blameless in all of this." The association," Catherine interrupted, "is with the Duchess of Blackthorn, who happens to be Margaret's sister, which means any slight against her is a slight against me. And any slight against me is a slight against this family." The Dowager Duchess's expression suggested she approved of Catherine's directness. Lady Pemberton's face had gone pale. "Your Grace, I meant no offense." "Of course you did," Catherine said. "But you're too clever to let it stand now that you understand the consequences. So let's be clear. The engagement proceeds as planned. Margaret marries your son, and in exchange, I will ensure the Blackthorn name supports the match publicly and enthusiastically. Are we understood?" It wasn't a question. Lady Pemberton understood that too. "Perfectly, Your Grace," she said finally. They left shortly after, the matter settled. Catherine waited until they were in the carriage before letting out the breath she'd been holding. "That was well done," the Dowager Duchess said. "Forceful without being crude. You're learning." "Oh, I was terrified the entire time." "Good. Means you were taking it seriously." The older woman smiled slightly. "But you didn't let the fear stop you. That's what matters." Over the next month, Catherine navigated London society with increasing confidence. She made calls, attended dinners, hosted her own small gatherings. Some women remained hostile, but many were surprisingly welcoming, especially those who'd felt constrained by society's rules themselves. "You're becoming something of a figure," Adrian said one evening as they prepared for yet another social event. "Women are starting to look up to you." "That's terrifying." "Why?" "Because I'm still figuring this out myself. What if I let them down?" "Then you let them down." Adrian fastened the clasp of her necklace. "Catherine, you're not responsible for everyone's expectations. You're just responsible for being yourself." But being herself, Catherine was discovering, meant confronting parts of her past she'd tried to bury. The letter from her father arrived in early December. Catherine stared at it for a full minute before opening it. "Catherine, I hope this letter finds you well. Margaret's wedding to Pemberton is set for January, and she has asked that you attend. I know our last meeting was difficult, but she is your sister, and she wishes for your presence. I will not pretend we parted on good terms. I will not claim to understand your choices. But you are still my daughter, and perhaps, if you are willing, we might find some way to coexist civilly for Margaret's sake." Your father, Catherine, showed the letter to Adrian that evening. He read it carefully, his expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to refuse, to make him understand how much he hurt me. But Margaret—" Catherine stopped, struggling with the words. She apologized. Actually apologized, and she's asked for me to be there. That matters. Then we'll go, Adrian said simply. Together. And if your father so much as looks at you wrong, we'll leave. The wedding was held at the Ashford estate on a freezing January morning. Catherine arrived with Adrian and the Dowager Duchess, her armor of silk and jewels firmly in place. Her mother was waiting in the entrance hall, looking older and more uncertain than Catherine had ever seen her. "Catherine," Lady Ashford said, "you came." "Margaret asked me to." A long pause, then quietly, "You look well." "Happy." "I am." Another pause. Catherine could see her mother struggling with something, words trying to form and failing. "I'm sorry," Lady Ashford finally said, "for how we treated you, for letting it happen. I told myself we were protecting the family, but really we were just taking the easy path. And you paid the price." Catherine hadn't expected an apology, didn't entirely know what to do with it. "I appreciate you saying that," she said carefully. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know, watching you now, seeing what you've become. I'm proud. I should have been proud years ago, but I'm proud now." Something in Catherine's chest cracked. "Thank you," she whispered. They didn't embrace, didn't suddenly become the loving family they'd never been. But it was something, a start, maybe. Margaret looked radiant in her wedding dress, every bit the perfect bride. When she saw Catherine, her face lit up. "You came," she said, rushing over. "I wasn't sure you would." "Of course I came." Margaret glanced at Adrian, at the Dowager Duchess, then back to Catherine. "Is it strange? Being married? Being a duchess?" "Terrifying," Catherine said honestly, "but also wonderful. You'll understand soon enough." "Is Pemberton anything like Adrian?" "I doubt it. But that's not necessarily bad. Different marriages work in different ways." They talked for a few more minutes before Margaret was pulled away by their mother for some last-minute adjustment. Catherine found herself standing alone in the drawing room, watching the organized chaos of wedding preparations. Thomas appeared at her elbow, drink already in hand, though it was barely noon. "So," he said, "the invisible sister becomes a duchess. Hell of a trick." "Thomas, I'm not mocking, actually impressed." He took a drink. "Father's been insufferable since the wedding, half proud, half furious that you managed what none of us could, actual success on your own terms. He has a strange way of showing pride. He has a strange way of showing anything." Thomas studied her. "Are you happy, Catherine? Truly?" The question surprised her. "Most of the time, yes." "Good. You deserve it, after everything." He paused. "I was a terrible brother." "You were." "I'm trying to be better. The commission Adrian arranged, it's giving me structure, purpose, making me face things I've avoided." He set down his glass. "Thank you for not letting Father destroy you, for proving it was possible to get out." Catherine felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "You're welcome." The ceremony itself was beautiful and traditional. Catherine sat with Adrian and his mother, watching Margaret pledge her life to Pemberton, and thought about how different her own wedding had been. No grand ceremony, no witnesses beyond a blacksmith and his wife, just survival and desperation and Adrian's hand in hers. But she wouldn't change it, not for anything. The reception was elaborate, hundreds of guests, endless food and champagne, dancing and speeches. Catherine navigated it with the ease she'd learned over the past months, Adrian always at her side. Near the end of the evening, her father approached. He looked uncomfortable, his usual aristocratic composure cracking slightly. "Catherine, Your Grace." He nodded to Adrian. "Might I speak with my daughter privately for a moment?" Adrian looked at Catherine, who nodded. He stepped away but stayed close enough to intervene if needed. Her father stood there for a long moment, clearly struggling with what to say. "I've been a poor father," he finally said. "Yes." "I told myself I was protecting the family, that hard choices were necessary, but really I was just afraid of debt, of scandal, of anything that threatened the image we presented to the world." He met her eyes. "And I sacrificed you to maintain that image. I'm sorry." Catherine had imagined this conversation 100 times, always with her being cold, unforgiving, making him understand how much he'd hurt her. But standing here now, seeing him genuinely struggling with remorse, she found she didn't want revenge, just acknowledgement. "I can't forget what you did," she said quietly. what you were willing to do, but I can accept the apology. That's more than I deserve. Probably. They stood in awkward silence for a moment longer. Then her father nodded and walked away, and Catherine felt something inside her finally, truly release. The closure she'd needed had arrived. Not perfect, not complete, but real. Spring came to London with unexpected warmth. Catherine had been a duchess for 6 months now, and the rhythm of her new life had become almost comfortable. She'd started hosting a weekly salon at Blackthorn House, gatherings of women interested in discussing more than just fashion and gossip. Literature, politics, philosophy, things Catherine had only ever explored alone in Yorkshire. "You're creating a revolution in my drawing room," Adrian said one evening after the latest gathering had dispersed. "Hardly a revolution, just conversation. Conversation between women who've never been encouraged to have opinions before. That's revolutionary enough." The salon grew in popularity, attracting women from across London society. Some came out of genuine interest, some from curiosity, some just to say they'd been. But they all came, which was the point. One afternoon in May, a young woman arrived who looked familiar. It took Catherine a moment to place her. Sarah Covington, Victoria's younger sister, barely 18. "Your Grace," Sarah said nervously, "I hope you don't mind my coming. Victoria said you wouldn't, but I wasn't sure." "Of course I don't mind," Catherine said warmly. "Please sit. We're discussing Mary Wollstonecraft today." Sarah's eyes lit up. "I've read A Vindication of the Rights of Woman 3 times. "Then you'll have plenty to contribute." After the salon ended, Sarah lingered. "May I ask you something personal, Your Grace?" "Catherine, please, and yes. How did you do it? Become this?" She gestured around the drawing room. "Everyone says you were nobody 6 months ago. Now you're changing things, making women think differently about themselves." Catherine considered the question carefully. "I stopped trying to be invisible, stopped accepting that I had to be small to be acceptable. And I got lucky, married someone who wanted me to be myself rather than some perfect ideal." "But weren't you terrified?" "Constantly. Still am, some days." "Then how do you keep going?" "By remembering that being terrified means I'm doing something that matters." Catherine smiled. "If it was easy, everyone would do it." Sarah nodded slowly, clearly thinking. "My parents want me to have a season next year, find a suitable husband, but I want—" She stopped, looked around as if worried someone might hear. "I want to go to university, study, actually learn things instead of just being decorative." "Then do it. It's not that simple. It never is, but it's possible." Catherine leaned forward. "Sarah, you're 18. You have time. Use it to figure out what you really want, then fight for it. Don't wait until you're 26 and exiled to start living." The girl left looking thoughtful, and Catherine wondered if she'd planted a seed that might grow into something significant. That evening, she told Adrian about the conversation. "You're becoming a mentor," he said, "to a whole generation of women who want more than what society offers them." "I'm just talking, sharing what I've learned. That's what mentors do." He pulled her close. "You're making a difference, Catherine. A real one." Summer brought unexpected news. Margaret was pregnant. The announcement came in a letter filled with excitement and fear in equal measure. "She wants to visit," Catherine said, showing the letter to Adrian. "Wants advice about, well, everything." "Then invite her. Stay as long as she likes." Margaret arrived a week later, her pregnancy barely showing but her anxiety obvious. "I'm terrified," she said over tea in Catherine's private sitting room. "What if I'm a terrible mother? What if I can't do this?" "Then you'll figure it out as you go," Catherine said. "The way everyone does." "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple, but it's manageable." Catherine poured more tea. "Margaret, you've spent your entire life being told you're perfect, that everything comes easily to you. But motherhood isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. And you can do that." They talked for hours about pregnancy, marriage, the strange isolation of being a wife in a world that expected perfection. For the first time since childhood, Catherine felt like she actually had a sister. "I'm glad you survived," Margaret said as she was leaving. "Not just the exile and everything with father, but survived being in our family. We didn't deserve you." "No," Catherine agreed. "You didn't. But we're doing better now." In July, the Dowager Duchess fell ill. Nothing serious, the doctors assured them, but enough to confine her to bed for several weeks. Catherine visited daily, reading to her, managing correspondence, handling the small crises that always seemed to emerge. They'd developed an unlikely friendship over the months, mutual respect built on shared intelligence and stubbornness. "You've become quite formidable," the Dowager Duchess said one afternoon. "Not what I expected when Adrian first told me he'd married you." "What did you expect?" "Some social climber, someone desperate and grasping. Instead, I got a woman with spine." She smiled. "I'm glad I was wrong. I'm glad you gave me a chance." Didn't have much choice. Adrian was determined. The Dowager Duchess's expression turned serious. "He's different now. Happier. More engaged with life. That's your doing. He saved me first. You saved each other. That's how the best marriages work." By autumn, Catherine had been a duchess for a year. The anniversary passed quietly, just her and Adrian, dinner at home, reminiscing about the chaotic journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked. "Not marrying Victoria, not following your mother's original plan?" "Never," Adrian said without hesitation. "Do you regret slapping me?" Catherine laughed. "That's the only thing that started this whole mess. So no, not even slightly." Then we're both satisfied with how it turned out. They were in the library, surrounded by books, the fire crackling. It was Catherine's favorite room in the house, the place where she felt most herself. "I want to do more," she said suddenly. Adrian looked up from his correspondence. "More what?" "The salon is good, but it's limited. Only reaches women already in London, already part of society." Catherine started pacing. "I want to fund education for girls, scholarships maybe. Give opportunities to women who don't have connections or money." "That's ambitious." "It's necessary." She turned to face him. "I was lucky, Adrian. I had just enough education to think for myself, just enough stubbornness to survive. But so many women don't. They're trapped by poverty or circumstance, and they never get the chance to be more than what their birth dictates. You want to change that?" "I want to try." Adrian set down his papers. "Then let's try. We have money. Use it for something that matters." They spent the next months planning. Catherine consulted with educators, visited schools, researched what existed and what was needed. The Dowager Duchess contributed both funds and connections. Even Margaret, once recovered from giving birth to a healthy son, offered support. The Blackthorn Foundation for Women's Education was announced in January, exactly a year after Margaret's wedding. The response was overwhelming, both support from progressive circles and outrage from traditional ones. "The Duchess of Blackthorn funds radicalism," one headline screamed. "Good," Catherine said when Adrian showed it to her. "Let them be outraged. Let them see that things are changing whether they like it or not." The first group of scholarships was awarded in spring, 10 girls from various backgrounds, given the opportunity to attend school and pursue education beyond what their circumstances allowed. Catherine met each of them personally, saw the hope and terror in their young faces, and remembered being invisible in her father's house. "You're not doing this for them," Adrian said quietly, watching her interact with the scholarship recipients. "You're doing it for the girl you were." Maybe, Catherine admitted. "Is that wrong?" "It's human, and it's working." One girl in particular caught Catherine's attention. Emma, 14 years old, brilliant, and hungry for knowledge in a way that reminded Catherine painfully of herself. "I want to study medicine," Emma said during their first meeting. "I know it's not allowed, that women can't be doctors, but I want to try anyway." "Then try," Catherine said. "The rules are changing, slowly, but they're changing. You might be one of the women who changes them." Emma's eyes shone. "You really think so?" "I think if someone had told me a year and a half ago that I'd be a duchess funding education for girls, I would have laughed at them. But here we are." Catherine smiled. "Don't limit yourself based on what people say is impossible. They're usually wrong." Summer brought Margaret's second visit, this time with her infant son. Catherine held the baby awkwardly, having no experience with children, but feeling something shift inside her as she looked down at his tiny face. "Have you thought about having children?" Margaret asked. "Sometimes," Catherine admitted. "Adrian wants them. I'm not sure I'm ready." "You'd be a wonderful mother," I'd be a different kind of mother than ours was. That's what would make you wonderful. Later that evening, Catherine brought up the conversation with Adrian. I heard Margaret's question earlier, he said, about children. And? And I meant what I told you when we married. I want you to be happy. If that includes children, wonderful. If it doesn't, that's fine too. Catherine curled against his side. I think I want them. Eventually, but not yet. There's still so much I want to do first. Then we wait. We have time. The foundation grew over the following year. More scholarships, partnerships with existing schools, even the beginning of a separate institution dedicated solely to educating girls. Catherine threw herself into the work with an intensity that sometimes worried Adrian. You're allowed to rest, he said one evening when she was working past midnight again. I'll rest when it's done. It's never going to be done. There will always be more girls who need help, more work to do. He gently closed her ledger. But you can't help anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. He was right, of course. Catherine had been running on determination and coffee for weeks, ever since they'd started planning the new school. I just keep thinking about all the years I wasted, she said. Being invisible, being silent. I can't get those years back, but I can make sure other girls don't waste theirs the same way. You're not doing this to make up for lost time. You're doing this because you care. That's enough. But it didn't feel like enough. Not when she met girls like Emma, whose intelligence was being wasted because society had decided women didn't need real education. Not when she saw young women being pushed into marriages they didn't want because they had no other options. The new school opened in the spring of 1851, 3 years after that fateful ball where Catherine had slapped a duke and changed her life forever. It was small, only space for 30 students initially, but it was theirs. A place where girls could learn mathematics and science and philosophy alongside the usual accomplishments. The opening ceremony was attended by everyone who mattered, and many who didn't but came anyway out of curiosity. Catherine gave a short speech about education and opportunity and the future she hoped they were building. 3 years ago, she concluded, I was invisible. Society had decided my worth, and that worth was essentially nothing. But I refused to accept that judgment. And now I stand before you as proof that women are not decorative objects to be arranged according to society's preferences. We are thinking, feeling, capable human beings who deserve the chance to prove our worth on our own terms. The applause was thunderous, from some quarters anyway. Others sat in stony silence. Catherine didn't care. She'd stopped caring what her critics thought somewhere between Yorkshire and Gretna Green. That evening, alone with Adrian in their library, she finally let herself believe it had worked. Not just the school, but everything. The escape, the marriage, the slow building of a life that was actually hers. I never thanked you properly, she said. For what? For riding through the night to save me. For standing up to my father. For letting me be myself instead of trying to mold me into some perfect duchess. Catherine, you saved yourself. I just provided the horse. She laughed at that. Is that how you remember it? That's how it happened. You made the choice to run, to fight, to refuse to be caged. I just gave you alternatives when you needed them. We saved each other then. I can live with that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down. Outside, London carried on. Society continued its endless dance of who was in favor and who was out, who had scandal attached to their name, and who'd managed to stay pristine. Catherine was no longer invisible, but she'd never be fully accepted either. Too outspoken, too unconventional, too willing to push boundaries. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, Victoria Covington, now Victoria Ashworth after marrying a baron with a good heart and a small fortune. I wanted to see the school, she explained when Catherine received her. Sarah talks about it constantly. She's applied for a teaching position, did you know? I did. She'll be wonderful. Victoria smiled. I wanted to thank you, actually, for showing all of us that there are other options, that we don't have to follow the path society lays out if it doesn't fit. You seem happy, Catherine observed. I am. Ashworth isn't Adrian, but he's kind and he lets me read whatever I want, and he doesn't expect me to be perfect all the time. That's enough. That's more than enough. After Victoria left, Catherine thought about paths and choices and the strange turns life could take. 3 years ago, she'd been standing against a ballroom wall. invisible and resigned to being nothing. Now she was funding education, changing lives, married to a man who loved her mind as much as anything else. It wasn't the life she'd imagined because she'd never had the audacity to imagine anything this good. That evening, as she and Adrian prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Same dark hair, same unremarkable features, but the woman looking back was different, confident, purposeful, visible. "What are you thinking?" Adrian asked. "That I'm glad I slapped you." He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Best thing that ever happened to me. To both of us." He came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and they stood there looking at their reflection. Two people who'd found each other in the most improbable way possible and built something real from it. Outside, London slept. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There was always resistance to change, always people who wanted women to remain decorative and silent. The foundation would face criticism, the school would struggle for funding, Catherine herself would continue to be a target for those who believed she'd risen above her station. But she'd faced worse. They both had. And they'd keep facing it together until the world they wanted to see actually existed. Catherine turned in Adrian's arms, kissed him softly, and felt the last piece of her old self, the invisible woman who'd accepted being nothing, finally, completely die. In her place stood Catherine Blackthorne, Duchess, educator, fighter. Someone who'd learned that being seen was terrifying and powerful and absolutely worth it. Someone who'd discovered that the only cage that truly held you was the one you built yourself. And someone who'd decided, definitively and irrevocably, that she would never be invisible again. The story that had started with a slap and a scandal had become something else entirely. A life built on courage, on refusing to accept limitations, on daring to believe she deserved more than the scraps society offered. Catherine had been told her entire life that she was worth nothing, that she should fade into the background and be grateful for any scrap of attention thrown her way. She'd proven them wrong. Spectacularly, publicly, undeniably wrong. And that, in the end, was the greatest triumph of all.